Hi guys, Olive here. Here today to recommend you some nonfiction books that I think you should read if you've read some other really popular nonfiction books out there. In recent years, I've been making more of an effort to pick up the well-known, the well-loved nonfiction books out there, because when left to my own devices, I tend to avoid the popular books in favor of some more obscure nonfiction titles. But as I've been picking up more of those really popular nonfiction books, I find that while I'm reading them, I'm reminded of some less well-known but still equally fantastic books. So in this video, I'm going to give you some recommendations of some of those lesser-known titles that I think would make great follow-up reads to the more popular books. So if you read and fell in love with any of the really popular titles on this list, and you want to read something else that's just like it, I've got you covered. Let's start with Brain on Fire by Susanna Cahalan, a memoir all about a medical emergency that this author experienced. One day, she was a normal 20-something, just enjoying her life. The next day, she was hospitalized, losing her grip on reality. It was a terrifying read, but a captivating one. I was equally as invested in the outcome of this story as I know a lot of other readers were. This was even turned into a movie back in 2016. If you couldn't get enough of that story, then you might also want to consider reading Inferno by Catherine Cho, another real-life medical drama about this author's experience with postpartum psychosis. She had fairly recently given birth to her child when she began hallucinating and slowly slipping away from who she once was. Both of these stories are gripping. Maybe you loved The Boys in the Boat by Daniel James Brown, the story of the stunning win of a men's crew team at the 1936 Olympics. Well, if you loved that story about a team's hard work in order to achieve a dream, allow me to suggest A Most Beautiful Thing by Arshay Cooper. This is the author's story of being a part of the very first all-black rowing team, one that was full of teenagers from a high school on Chicago's West Side. Joining this team was a struggle for all of the members, including the author. They had to deal with the opinions of their classmates, many of whom believed rowing to be a white sport. They had to learn to swim, and they also had to get a handle on the basics of the sport. But being a part of this team created an unbreakable bond between these kids, and it showed them how limitless their potential was. And if you fall in love with this story, there's actually a documentary that follows up with all the members of this team decades after the events of this memoir. If you are a fan of memoirs, though, you may have already read Maybe You Should Talk to Someone by Lori Gottlieb, the therapist author's story of seeking out a therapist herself after a very hard, unexpected breakup while continuing to see her own patients. Well, if you loved this one as much as I did, then I absolutely recommend you read Good Morning Monster by Katherine Gildener. This author is also a therapist, and in this book she discusses the journeys, the breakthroughs of 5 of her clients over the years, but she's also present in this book. She discusses how she learned and grew as a therapist during this same window of time. I think you'll find that this one is equally as emotional and moving as Maybe You Should Talk to Someone. But speaking of emotional, if you were one of the many people who fell in love with Crying in H Mart by Michelle Zauner, the musician author's story of bonding with her Korean mother through food before sadly losing her to cancer, then I think you might also enjoy another tale of a Korean mother-daughter bond, The Magical Language of Others by E.J. Ko. E.J. Ko also had to go without her mother at a certain point in her life, but it was a much different situation. Her parents decided to repatriate to South Korea in order for her father to accept a very good job opportunity. But the author was a teenager at the time, and she was pretty well established here in the States, so they left her behind to live with her older brother until it was time for her to go off to college. And while they were living in South Korea, her mother was sending her letters in Korean that the author then translates into English in order to include them in this book. And it seems like the intention of those letters was to parent her from afar. Both of these books look at mother-daughter connections and what happens specifically to a daughter when that connection is severed. Both of these books are beautifully written. They're both full of longing. If you liked one of these, I think it's highly likely you'll get along along with the other. But now, if you're a fan of the book behind the TV show, Orange is the New Black by Piper Kerman, the memoir of a woman who spent time in prison after getting caught up with drug runners, you might want to also consider reading Corrections in Ink by Carrie Blakinger. Carrie Blakinger was once a star figure skater, but once she stopped skating and she didn't have anywhere to put that hyper-focused energy that she was pouring into competitions previously, she turned to drugs. And eventually she was arrested for drug possession, she was sent to prison, and this is a memoir about that entire experience, what it was like living in prison, navigating that extremely nonsensical world. I think this is a very logical follow-up to Orange is the New Black. Know My Name by Chanel Miller has been an enormously popular nonfiction book in recent years. I've heard several people, in fact, call it their all-time favorite book. It was written by the victim of a crime. Chanel Miller was assaulted, and the judge in her case went extremely easy on the perpetrator. Chanel Miller read an impact statement at the end of the trial, and that impact statement was eventually posted online. It quickly went viral. And because of all that attention, she got this book deal to write about her experience. So she does write about the initial crime, but then about the trial and all the notoriety she gained after this impact statement went viral, and how all of that re-traumatized her. It's an extremely powerful book, and one in which Chanel Miller gets to take her power back. And if you were moved by that, then I would definitely suggest reading Eggshell Skull by Bree Lee, a memoir in which the author seeks justice for a crime that was committed against her during her younger years, even when the odds were stacked against her, given the realities of the Australian justice system. If you're looking to experience the power behind Know My Name all over again, Eggshell Skull is a good place to start. One of the most popular nonfiction titles of the 2010s was The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks by Rebecca Skloot, one that was so widely read, so popular, that even my own mother was getting on my case that I hadn't read it yet. Once I did finally read it, I was actually happy that she got on my case about it because it was fantastic. This book is about how cancer cells were taken from a Black woman back in the 1950s without her knowledge and without her consent. But her cells were special because of how fast and how efficiently they reproduced themselves. They were perfect for medical research, and they've been used for medical research pretty much ever since. But none of the family members of this woman, Henrietta Lacks, have been able to share in any of those profits. If that story of medical injustice got your attention, you might want to also consider reading The Organ Thieves by Chip Jones, the absolutely unbelievable story of how a Black man in 1968 walked into a hospital in Virginia and never came back out again. He came in with a head injury, and within hours, he was declared brain dead, and before his family could be contacted to give their consent, his heart and kidneys were removed and transplanted into a white man. It happened for a handful of reasons, one of them being this competition amongst American surgeons to become the first American surgeon to perform a heart transplant, but it also definitely happened because of attitudes toward people of color at the time. Both of these books cover the medical side and the social injustice side of their respective topics. On that medical theme, though, I know a lot of people read and really enjoyed Caitlin Doty's memoir called Smoke It's in Your Eyes. This book is about the author's longtime fascination with death and her eventual work at a crematorium. So sure, this book is macabre, but I know it helped a lot of people, myself included, see death a whole lot differently. But if you too were intrigued by Smoke It's in Your Eyes rather than creeped out by it, I think a really good follow-up read would be Past Mortems by Carla Valentine, alternatively titled The Chick and the Dead here in the United States. This author worked as a pathology technician in a mortuary, handling remains, helping to perform autopsies. I think it's kind of the British counterpart to Caitlin Doty's work. Just very recently, I finally picked up I Am Malala by Malala Yousafzai, a memoir of this quite young author in which she discusses her early life spent in Pakistan, her very public outcry for the rights that girls have to an education, but how that notoriety made her a target of the Taliban. The whole time I was reading it, though, I couldn't help but be reminded of another really powerful memoir I had read called War in Me by Falia Hassan. This is this author's heartbreaking life story of growing up in Iraq and forgetting what life was like without war raging in the background, but all the while still fighting for her right to get an education and to harness the power of her voice through poetry, even when she faced threats for doing both of those things. Both of these women are such inspirations. And maybe you too were inspired by Just Mercy by Bryan Stevenson, which is all about the work this lawyer author did to get prisoners off of death row, but it's also more generally about all of the inequalities that are present within the American justice system. Well, if that book spoke to you, then I highly encourage you to read Love and Justice by Maya Moore Irons and Jonathan Irons. Jonathan Irons was locked up for a crime he didn't commit when he was a young man, and he spent many of his years in prison not just trying to survive, which he talks about in the book, but also trying to educate himself on the legal system, on his own case, so that he could fight for his release. Well, through a family friend, he met Maya Moore, one of the best women's basketball players of all time. The two of them fell in love, and she helped him fight for his freedom, which he did ultimately gain after a struggle, which happened still relatively recently, and he was released after 23 years behind bars for a crime he never committed in the first place. Both of these are life-changing books. And then finally, one of my favorite nonfiction books is H is for Hawk by Helen MacDonald. This author's story of training a notoriously temperamental bird of prey after the loss of her father. It became an unexpected runaway hit after its release, and for a good reason. It's personal, it's well written, it's intense, it's got this vein of wildness in it. If you also love H is for Hawk, one to pick up next would definitely be Featherhood by Charlie Gilmore. This author's story of adopting an orphaned magpie chick and raising it, all the while he was grappling with his own father issues. Issues with his biological father, his stepfather, and then the fact that he was getting ready to become a father himself. Just like H is for Hawk, this one is personal, it's beautifully written, and it's perfect for bird lovers. So those were all the recommendations that I had for you today. Please be sure to let me know what you thought of them down in the comments. And also, as I continue to read more of the popular nonfiction books, since that's a goal of mine, I'm sure more of these types of connections will occur to me in the future. So let me know if you'd like to see more of these types of videos, and I'll consider making them. All the books that I did discuss today will be listed and linked for you in the description box below. They're there for your clicking convenience. And at the very bottom of that exact same description box, you'll also see links to everywhere you can find me around the internets, like Goodreads, Instagram, the Story Graph, all the places I'm the most active, in case you want to keep up with what I'm reading and doing right now. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you're having a wonderful day, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.